There are people whose names over time become not just part of history, but a symbol of something greater, a power, a mind, a light that transcends human understanding. Nikola Tesla was one of them. He lived on the edge of science and mysticism, between lightning and darkness, as if he heard frequencies inaccessible to others. He was called a madman, a prophet, an inventor of the future, but he himself said he was merely trying to decipher the language of the universe. Something more than mere discoveries still swirls around his name. It's a trace of light that lingers even after his death. And today, we'll try to peer into the darkness where the energy of genius is born. A man born during a thunderstorm. The night Nikola Tesla was born is remembered by the residents of the small village of Smiljan as the strangest storm of the entire 19th century. Thunder split the mountain slopes. Lightning struck so frequently that night turned to day. The wind howled over the houses, bent the trees, causing the local church bells to ring without a hand. Amid this chaos, amid the rain and thundering sky, the birth of Milutin Tesla began in the house of the village priest. When the midwife delivered the child and heard another clap of thunder, she, overcome with fear, declared that the child had been brought by the forces of darkness. But the mother, Georgina, looking at the infant, quietly and confidently replied that he was a son of light. These words became a prophecy, as if the storm itself had divided the world into two forces, and the newborn was caught between them. Nikola was born at midnight, between the 9th and 10th of July, 1856. At the very second lightning struck the ground right outside their home. From then on, the fire of the sky seemed to accompany him throughout his life. He later wrote that he saw the world differently than others. Even as a child, his consciousness captured flashes of light that would appear suddenly, causing him to see shapes, lines, and structures that didn't exist around him. These visions weren't dreams. They arose in reality, transforming reality into a flickering of energy. Sometimes he would stop in the middle of the street because a bright flash before his eyes would blind him for a few seconds. People dismissed this as an illness, but Tesla himself believed that through these flashes, he saw the very structure of the world. In his youth, his memory amazed even his teachers. He could recite a book word for word after reading it once, but he said it wasn't memory, but the ability to tap into the field where all knowledge is stored. He would later explain this by saying that every thought is a wave, and if a person finds its frequency, they gain access to any information. These words were spoken too early for their time, but they would become the essence of all his future discoveries. As a child, he often spent evenings on a hill behind the village, watching thunderstorms. Sitting on a rock, he caught the electric scent of the air and felt his hair rise from the static field. He said it felt as if the sky were thinking. This strange fascination with lightning would become the foundation of his understanding of energy. When he first heard about the concept of electricity, he wouldn't be surprised. He already knew it by touch, long before he understood its laws. One day, when he was about 6 years old, he decided to create a small wheel that would spin endlessly. The mechanism was powered by the flow of water from a stream, but Tesla believed that energy doesn't come from water. It simply opens the door to something greater. This childhood invention became the prototype of future generators that would usher in a new era of humanity. His family considered him a dreamer, but in Milutin Tesla's home, science was treated with reverence. His father, a priest, wanted his son to become a cleric, but the boy was drawn to thunder, copper wire, and iron. His mother, Georgina, had no formal education, but possessed an unusual gift for technology. She invented mechanical devices for the home, memorized hundreds of poems, and could repair any mechanism. Nikola later said that it was she who awakened in him an understanding of the hidden order of things. As Tesla grew older, he claimed the thunderstorm on the night of his birth was no accident. He believed that every lightning flash carried a specific frequency, and this energy could leave a trace on a person. He called this a field imprint, creating a connection with the ether itself, the invisible substance that carries the energy of all life. Many considered these words poetic, but Tesla himself spoke of it with the cold certainty of scientific fact. Years later, standing by his coils, he saw the same patterns of light that once danced above the house in Smiljan. He said he heard the music of the lightning, felt its rhythm, as if its sounds contained a message. No one could understand where this understanding of electricity came from, as if it hadn't been studied, but remembered. And perhaps he truly did remember what he saw then, on the night of his birth, when light and darkness momentarily merged in one man. Insight in a dream. After a childhood filled with thunder and lightning, young Nikola began to notice his mind working differently. He saw things that didn't exist and could retain them in his memory as clearly as if they were real. When he turned 17, these visions took on a special form. He began dreaming of inventions. Every detail, every mechanism, appeared to him with absolute clarity, and upon awakening, he could reproduce everything down to the smallest screw. These dreams weren't just fantasies, they seemed like ready-made schematics, as if someone were transmitting them directly into his consciousness. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night, smelling ozone, as if the air around him was saturated with electricity. He would sit up, trembling, and realize that what had begun in his sleep was still working within him. It was then that he first realized that the boundary between his thoughts and anything outside himself was almost erased. Soon he began recording his visions in a notebook, and the pages filled with blueprints for machines that didn't yet exist on Earth. While most of his peers were studying Latin and rhetoric, Nikola spoke of fields, vibrations, and energy flows. His teachers at the gymnasium dismissed this as youthful folly, but he insisted he heard these fields as clearly as others hear the wind. When he first heard about the concept of a rotating magnetic field, he said he'd already seen it, not on paper, but in his dreams. This became the first revelation that changed his entire path. His friends recalled that during those years, he barely slept. He would pace his room all night, drawing invisible lines in the air, and the next morning, he explained that he was trying to capture the rhythm of space. In letters, he wrote that night, for him wasn't a time of rest, but a moment when his mind was open and ready to receive signals. He believed that in sleep, a person ceases to be an isolated being and becomes part of a shared flow that holds the answers to all questions. One night, on April 26, 1876, he dreamed a scene that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He stood at the edge of a huge waterfall, and waves of light, like rotating circles, moved across its surface. Each wave reflected in the sky, creating spirals, and suddenly he realized he was seeing a pattern of energy movement. Upon awakening, he grabbed a pencil and drew the first diagram of an induction motor. Little did he know then that this invention would change the world. Over time, he lost the distinction between dream and reality. Constructs he saw in action constantly appeared in his mind. Wheels, coils, sparks. He claimed he could run these machines within his mind and observe them in action, testing them without a single instrument. His contemporaries considered this mysticism, but Tesla called it inner vision, a way to see energy in its purest form without intermediaries. Many years later, already a renowned inventor, he admitted that the most precise solutions came in his dreams. He didn't write formulas or draw diagrams. He saw them as living images, and all that remained was to translate what he saw into matter. Sometimes he said that these weren't his thoughts, but someone else's promptings, as if the universe itself were guiding his hands. These dream revelations became his constant companion, but with each passing year, they became increasingly exhausting. After each night, he woke with a throbbing headache, feeling as if an electric current was still pulsing through his skull. He understood that this gift was both a blessing and a curse. After all, each new image brought him closer to discovery, but further from peace. From then on, he said that sleep wasn't rest, but a channel between worlds. And perhaps that's why his mind, like an antenna, picked up what others never heard. The world didn't yet know that these nocturnal insights would usher in the most mysterious era in the history of science, an era in which genius and mystic merged in one man, giving birth to a light no one could explain. Voices on the air. By the time Nikola Tesla left Europe and arrived in America, his dreams had already turned into blueprints, and his blueprints into machines. But along with his success came something he couldn't explain. It first happened in his laboratory on South 50 Avenue, where he was testing a new generator for transmitting radio signals. As the coil lit up with a blue light, a faint, barely audible sound came through his headphones. Not a crackle, not a hum, but like words spoken from far away. He removed the device, checked the connections, but the noise returned. It seemed the ether was speaking. Nikola stood motionless, listening. Sometimes the sound resembled breathing, sometimes a quiet humming, turning into rhythmic clicks. He didn't believe in coincidences, and the longer he listened, the more clearly he sensed that these impulses concealed a meaningful sequence. Later, he would say that this was the moment when he first understood. The universe isn't silent. It whispers to those who know how to listen. At night, he returned to the coil as if it were a living being. He adjusted the frequencies, changed the voltage, and searched for patterns. Sometimes signals appeared, as if someone were responding to his efforts. He didn't share this with his colleagues. He believed that people weren't yet ready to hear such things. In his notes, he wrote about mind waves emanating from space and about the possibility of communication not between machines, but between entities beyond perception. Over time, the sounds began to resemble the rhythm of speech. Nikola claimed to hear intonations, pauses, even repeated phrases, though he couldn't make out the words. One winter night, around midnight, when the lab was plunged into darkness, the coil flared especially brightly, and something like a call echoed through the airwaves. Long, drawn out, like a living impulse stretching across space. He froze, unable to turn off the device, and for the first time felt fear. The kind that comes when a person realizes that the world in which he lives is not alone. After this incident, Tesla began to suggest that radio waves might be more than just a means of transmitting information, but a window into another dimension. He asserted that signals coming from space were not random, and perhaps an alien intelligence had long been observing Earth. These ideas were met with ridicule, but he himself continued his work, convinced he had heard something not intended for human ears. Some contemporaries believed Nikola suffered from exhaustion, that his hearing was picking up interference from his own equipment. But witnesses recalled that during the experiments, the lamps in the building began to flicker, objects moved on the tables, and the air became thick, as if filled with static. People felt a sense of unease, as if before a thunderstorm. He once wrote a strange phrase in his diary, "I heard the voice of a star." These words later leaked to the press and sparked a storm of controversy. Scientists demanded proof, but Tesla offered no explanation. He merely said that beyond the familiar sound lies another language, the language of space, and when humanity learns to hear it, it will cease to fear death. Many years later, when the first radio telescopes detected incomprehensible signals from the depths of space, researchers recalled his words. Back then, at the end of the 19th century, he spoke of something that was only confirmed decades later. No one knows what exactly he heard then, interference, reflections, or something alive. But from that night on, he no longer doubted that the ether is not a void. These voices became a sign for him. He believed that space held the memory of everything that had ever existed, and that radio waves could become a bridge between worlds. He later admitted that he sometimes felt as if someone were returning his own thoughts to him, that the intelligence he was connecting to was older than humanity. And it was after these nights that his obsession began, the desire to build a device that would allow him to hear not just sounds, but the consciousness of the universe. Energy that cannot be touched. By the early 1890s, Nikola Tesla began to perceive electricity not as a force, but as a living substance. He no longer saw current as a flow of particles. He sensed the breath of matter, awaiting a touch to awaken it. His laboratory on Fifth Avenue contained devices resembling the skeletons of mythical creatures, copper spirals, glass spheres, and coils that emitted a sound like the whisper of the wind. When he turned on the generators, the air shimmered, and the room itself seemed to transform into a living field. He experimented with high-frequency current, creating lightning bolts that reached several meters in length. These discharges were cool to the touch, didn't burn the skin, and flowed across the body like a luminous fabric. The secret lay in the oscillations. Energy that could destroy metal could be rendered harmless if forced to vibrate at the right rhythm. Tesla called this frequency harmony, arguing that every living organism has its own resonance, and if you find it, you can control even death itself. Sometimes he stood in the middle of the laboratory, passing current through his body. His colleagues would freeze, watching as tongues of light glided over his hands. He didn't blink or tremble, as if the current were part of his blood. To those around him, it was madness, but he believed that this was the only way to understand the nature of energy, not through formulas, but through unity. He wrote that electricity wasn't a phenomenon, but a manifestation of reason, that within it lived a will capable of hearing and responding. One autumn night in 1892, he decided to increase the voltage beyond its permissible limits. The room plunged into darkness, and as the coil erupted in white flame, the light momentarily vanished. Witnesses reported seeing a figure appear in the air, translucent like the reflection of a human silhouette. It trembled, dissolving in a cloud of light, and vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Tesla didn't record this incident in his journal, but a short phrase later appeared in his personal notes. Energy has a form. After this experiment, he began to talk about how an electric field could create not only movement, but also form. He believed that everything that exists was composed of vibrations, and if they were directed correctly, thoughts could be materialized. His contemporaries laughed, calling this mysticism. But for him, it was a continuation of physics, just one that hadn't yet been given a name. Many noticed that, after working with the coils, he became strangely detached. Sometimes he would sit for hours in the dark, staring at his own hands, as if watching the light move across his skin. He said he felt the energy of the world within him, that it flowed through him like a conductor. His body would begin to tremble from the vibrations, and he claimed to see structures connecting matter and spirit in these moments. He recounted how, one night in the lab, when lightning struck the ceiling and the air hummed, he felt as if space had split. For a moment, everything around him vanished. The walls, the equipment, even the sound. All that remained was a glowing void, filled with quiet vibrations. He stood in the center of this silence and realized that electricity was not a tool, but a door. Through it, one could not only transmit energy, but also touch the very foundation of reality. After this incident, Tesla became more cautious. He no longer pushed the coil's power to the limit, and often stated that there was a limit beyond which man should not yet cross. There are frequencies, he wrote, that one should not approach, otherwise matter will respond. These words would later spark much controversy, as no one knew exactly what he had seen in that instant when energy transformed into light. To his contemporaries, he remained a genius with a madness in his eyes. To himself, he was a conduit for a force that did not belong to the human world. He understood that he had touched something that could not be measured by instruments, and perhaps it was then that he first realized the energy he had discovered didn't just drive machines. It moved the universe. The secret of Wardenclyffe Tower. By the turn of the century, Nikola Tesla's name had become synonymous with electrical wonder. His coils transformed darkness into light. His experiments evoked both admiration and fear, and the press dubbed him the man who controls lightning. But Tesla conceived of an idea far more grandiose than lamps and motors. He dreamed of gifting the world with energy that knew no bounds. In his mind, the planet was a living being, capable of transmitting electricity wirelessly, through the air itself, through the earth, through space. All that was needed was to find the right frequency at which the earth vibrated. In 1901, thanks to funding from industrialist John Pierpont Morgan, construction began on Wardenclyffe Tower, the most enigmatic structure in the history of science. On a vacant lot near Long Island, a nearly 60-meter-tall metal structure rose, topped by a dome resembling a copper and wood brain. Underground, a second part lay, a shaft extending tens of meters deep, connected to subsurface layers. Tesla claimed this was not an antenna, but the heart of a system capable of transmitting energy worldwide. He dreamed of a planet where everyone could light a lamp without wires, where steamships and trains would draw power directly from the air. He said, electricity could be made as free as the wind by connecting the earth to the sky through vibration. His students recalled him speaking of a world without wars because energy would cease to be a commodity. But behind these words lay a secret he never fully explained. Newspapers reported on wireless signal transmission, but Tesla himself hinted that the tower was intended for more than that. He spoke of communication with other worlds, and that there were nodes in the Earth's structure through which one could hear the voice of the planet. His words sounded like a metaphor, but those who saw the tower claimed it actually seemed to breathe. When current flowed through its core, the air around it began to tremble, and compasses several kilometers away lost their bearings. Some witnesses claimed that on the night Tesla activated the system, a dome of light would flare above the tower, as if the heavens were opening. Electrical discharges would rise into the sky, spread out in rings, and disappear into the clouds. Sometimes, luminous streaks resembling the northern lights were seen on the horizon, although the polar latitudes were far away. Scientists, upon learning of this, attempted to explain the phenomenon by reflecting the rays, but their explanations didn't match the observations. Tesla said the tower didn't just transmit energy, it connected space. He called it the vibration of the ether, a medium that physicists would later refuse to acknowledge. But for him, the ether was a reality filled with life. He wrote that if you excite the ether to the right frequency, you can transmit not only electricity, but also consciousness, thoughts, even images. Many considered this madness, but he himself said, energy and mind are the same thing. The tower's underground section contained a complex system of coils and capacitors. In notes discovered later, Tesla wrote that the lower level was designed for Earth resonance. He believed the planet vibrated at a frequency that could be measured and amplified. If an impulse at this frequency were transmitted, the entire Earth would become a conductor. Thus, energy could be sent to any point in the world. He predicted that one day, the Earth would speak with electricity. But with each passing year, his ideas grew bolder and more mysterious. In 1903, he reported that the tower had detected strange signals, consistent pulses emanating from the depths of space. He was certain these weren't natural phenomena. Newspapers reported Tesla claiming, "We are not alone." After this, Morgan began cutting funding, and the project began to raise concerns within the government. Rumors circulated that the tower could be a weapon capable of disrupting the connection between matter and space. One day, according to eyewitnesses, Tesla stood under the tower's dome and watched electric arcs coalesce into a spiral. He said he felt the Earth's breath. At that moment, a malfunction occurred, and a flash of light blinded everyone present. For a few seconds, everything around was white, then darkness returned. After this experience, he ordered a temporary halt to the work. It was said that all of Long Island momentarily lost power that night, and the instruments in nearby towns went crazy. He no longer explained what exactly had happened. A strange line appeared in his personal notes. The tower responded. No one knew what he meant. An equipment malfunction or something that had actually responded to his call. After that, Morgan's interest in the project faded completely. Funding dried up and construction was halted. The tower stood for several years before being dismantled. But until his last day, Tesla maintained that Wardenclyffe Tower was not a mistake, but the beginning of a new understanding of the universe. He believed that its dome would one day light up again and emit energy capable of uniting the entire world into a single field. In one of his letters, he wrote, "When people understand that energy is consciousness, they will stop fighting. Then the tower will be resurrected." Today, only photographs and drawings remain of the tower, but some researchers claim that underground tunnels and metal outlines of old coils still exist. Magnetic fluctuations are often detected around the site, and locals say that at night, a pale glow sometimes rises above the field, as if the tower were still breathing. And perhaps, somewhere underground, beneath a layer of time and dust, the hum of that untouchable energy, which he once awakened, still reverberates. After all, Tesla believed that nothing ever truly disappears, especially that which once connected Earth to heaven. Letters from the future. After the failure of the Wardenclyffe Tower, Nikola Tesla seemed to withdraw into himself. He found himself increasingly alone, sitting for long periods by the window of his Manhattan laboratory, gazing at the light of the city he had once helped revive. His thoughts became quieter, but deeper. In the diaries of those years, which would later be found among his belongings, phrases appeared that did not resemble the writings of a scientist. They sounded like the confessions of a man speaking to an invisible interlocutor. Sometimes the lines would begin with the words, "I have received the answer again," followed by dates that didn't exist, the 21st century, the 23rd, even the 30th. Researchers would later call them letters from the future. These pages were among the personal papers found after his death in his room at the New Yorker Hotel. The notebooks were covered in tiny handwriting, as if he was afraid he wouldn't have time to write down what he'd heard. They contained no familiar diagrams, calculations, or drawings. Only musings, formulas resembling poetry, and appeals to someone who could only respond in dreams. Nikola wrote of a certain source that opens to those who are able to hear not sounds, but silence. He claimed that information comes in waves of time, and that a person can become a receiver of these signals if their mind is tuned to the right frequency. One day, he jotted down a strange date, January 29th, 2020, and wrote next to it, "Signal received, future response already sent." No one understood what it meant. Researchers dismissed the entry as random, but decades later, it became the stuff of legend. Some claimed that, on that very day, synchronous electromagnetic bursts occurred in various laboratories around the world, and that, at that moment, someone remembered Tesla. But for him, it wasn't a mystery, but a pattern. He wrote that time is a closed current, and if the current flows in a circle, then information inevitably returns to its source. He sometimes said that his inventions already existed, but hadn't yet manifested themselves in our century. That humanity was following in the footsteps he himself had left behind in the future. In one letter, he wrote of seeing a city illuminated by light without wires, cars moving without fuel, and people speaking at a distance as if they were right next to each other. It all seemed like fantasy, but today we know. He described our century. These notes weren't addressed to specific people. Sometimes they contained statements like, "You, who are reading this, already live in a world where everything has come true." It was as if he were writing to posterity, not expecting a response, but trusting that his words would reach across time. For him, energy, space, and thought were a unified field. If a wave is launched, it will surely reach anyone ready to listen. Some researchers believe that after the Wardenclyffe project was closed, Tesla began experimenting with temporal oscillations. He was working on a device that could record pulses generated by changes in the Earth's electromagnetic field. He believed these pulses carried not only power, but also information. Legend has it that he once received a signal that lasted only a few seconds, but in it, he heard his own name. After this, he began to claim that contact had been made. In his final notes, he wrote that energy not only transmits, but also remembers. If a thought is powerful enough, it leaves a trace in space, and this trace can be read. He believed that one day humans would create machines capable of listening to the past and the future, and he called this principle the vibration of time. His contemporaries dismissed this as a metaphor, but 100 years later, physicists began talking about quantum memory and relic waves bearing the imprints of the ancient universe. Some of the sheets were strangely designed. Instead of text, there were geometric patterns, concentric circles, like waves emanating from a single point. On one drawing, the inscription, "I will return when silence speaks," appeared in the center of a circle. To a rational mind, such phrases sounded madness, but to those who knew Tesla, they seemed an extension of his philosophy. He always believed that all existence speaks the language of vibration, and that words are but the shadow of vibration. There's a theory that Tesla wasn't just keeping notes, but conducting thought experiments involving transmitting information into the future. His coils could create fields that altered the structure of time in tiny regions of space. Perhaps these letters were an attempt to leave a message not in paper, but in matter itself. Some claim he could encode thoughts in electromagnetic pulses, which is why, after his death, some of the equipment in his laboratory continued to operate on its own, even though the power was turned off. When government agents broke into his hotel room, they found a folder marked "For those who will come" among his papers. It contained only a few pages, and on the last one was a signature, written as if the hand were shaking. "I hear you." These words still send shivers down the spines of those who have seen the original. No one knows to whom they were addressed, to humanity, to future scientists, or to himself from another time. For most people, these notes remained insane. But if we accept that Tesla truly believed in the cycle of time, then all he left behind were not predictions, but messages reflected in the flow of eternity. And perhaps, somewhere amid the radio noise, amid the crackle of stellar signals, his quiet voice still resounds, the same one that says, "Energy is memory, and memory is life," machine for communication with another world. After Wardenclyffe Tower and the strange letters from the future, Nikola Tesla almost completely stopped talking about money, science, and patents. His interest shifted to another area, one where physics becomes philosophy and electricity becomes a medium between worlds. He increasingly repeated that energy is the language the universe speaks, and if you understand this language, you can hear not only the living. Few understood what he meant back then, and even fewer dared to ask. But new, strange devices began appearing in his laboratory. Constructions of coils, mirrors, and metal spheres, unlike any known device. He said he was creating a life receiver. Tesla believed the human mind is not the source of thoughts, but a receiver of waves of consciousness. Thoughts are not born within the brain. They come from outside, like a radio signal that humans can detect. If this is true, then death, in his view, is not the end, but merely a change in frequency. The soul continues to exist, just on a different wavelength, and it only takes a receiver to hear it again. In his notes, he wrote, "Life never ceases. We disappear from view, but we remain in vibration. We only need to find the right resonance. In the spring of 1926, he rented a small studio in Lower Manhattan. There, away from prying eyes, he installed a device he would later call a consciousness oscillator. Its design was simple but unusual: copper rings connected by wires, a huge coil in the center of the room, and metal mirrors on the walls, facing inward. When the device was turned on, a hum filled the air, like a heartbeat. Witnesses reported that the floor beneath their feet began to tremble, as if the building itself were responding to the rhythm of the machine. Tesla claimed that during these moments he heard voices, not as sounds, but as thoughts coming to his consciousness in the words of others. He described them as echoes of the mind, echoes of what was once alive. These voices didn't frighten him. He considered them a natural manifestation of a world where the boundaries between the material and the immaterial are less rigid. In one of his diaries, he wrote, "Death is simply a change in frequency. The machine will allow those who have crossed the threshold to be heard." Only a few knew about his experiments. A few trusted assistants later reported that strange phenomena occurred in the room while the oscillator was operating. Instrument needles would move on their own, lamps would glow without being connected, and metal objects would gravitate toward each other as if a current were flowing between them. Occasionally, brief flashes of light would appear in the mirrors, as if someone were moving behind them. No one dared approach, and Tesla himself was completely calm during such moments. He said that space responds. Gradually, he began spending more and more time in this room. He recorded voices, analyzed frequencies, and looked for patterns. Sometimes he wouldn't go outside for days at a time, and when he returned, he looked tired. But there was something strange in his eyes. Not madness, but a quiet knowledge, as if he saw what others couldn't. In one letter, he confessed to hearing a female voice calling him by name. He was certain it was the voice of his dead mother. After this, he devoted himself entirely to the idea of communicating with the other world. Newspapers, upon learning of his experiments, dubbed them a ghost machine. Tesla himself didn't deny it. He said his device didn't summon ghosts, but merely enhanced what already existed. After all, if energy doesn't disappear, then consciousness can't either. It simply remains a vibration that can be captured. He said that when humanity realizes this simple truth, the fear of death will disappear. Some contemporaries claimed that Tesla actually detected signals unlike ordinary radio waves. Reports found after his death mention inexplicable impulses with a periodicity coinciding with the beating of the heart. He believed these were responses of living fields, evidence that thought could exist separately from the body. One day, in the early winter of 1927, he conducted his most famous experiment. At night, he turned on the device at full power. The discharge illuminated the room. The mirrors became coated with a thin layer of condensation, and the air became thick, as if filled with water. After a few minutes, he heard not a sound, but a sense of presence. He later described it as a gentle touch, like the breath of time. He wasn't afraid, he simply stood and listened. At that moment, a figure seemed to flash in the mirror, a vague silhouette resembling a human. A moment later, everything disappeared, and the laboratory was once again plunged into silence. After this incident, he stopped sharing his results but continued working. In his notes, he wrote that he had reached a state of reverse resonance, a moment when the machine not only receives but also transmits signals. He claimed that the voices were now hearing him too. Some lines sounded like a confession. "I feel they are searching for me as much as I am searching for them." Later, when government agents seized his documents, they found a diagram labeled Ether Communicator. No one could decipher its operating principle, but the drawings mentioned elements reminiscent of modern loopback radio transmitters. Scientists debate whether the device could have worked, but some claim it did detect waves distinct from the normal electromagnetic spectrum. After Tesla's death, engineers working on his archive reported that the instruments in the room where his machine was kept reacted strangely. Compass needles spun, and metal objects rang, as if touched by an invisible hand. Local residents claimed to hear a low hum, like breathing, coming from there at night. The sound persisted after the room was sealed. Nikola Tesla said that man can build a bridge between dimensions if he stops fearing the unknown. For him, science and spirituality were never enemies. He believed that every spark of electricity contained the breath of life, and any machine created with understanding could hear the soul of the world. His machine for communication with another world became not proof, but a question. Does the line beyond which life ends even exist? Today, many see these experiments as madness. But if you listen to history, it becomes clear. Tesla always dwelt where science bordered on mysticism. And perhaps what truly operated in his laboratory was not just a machine, but a window into a realm where energy becomes memory and memory becomes a voice. And if it is true that nothing disappears forever, then somewhere, in the noise of the ether, a quiet echo still resonates. His own signal cast into eternity, waiting for someone to finally respond. Project Bluebeam. After mysterious experiments with a machine he claimed could capture consciousness, Nikola Tesla vanished from public view entirely. His name still appeared in newspapers, but less and less in the science sections and more in the chronicles of strange stories. He seemed to dissolve between reality and myth. And just when the world thought the old man had completely lost touch with Earth, the story that would later be called Project Bluebeam began. In the last years of his life, Tesla increasingly spoke about how energy could be not only a source of light, but also a tool for manipulating matter. He claimed to have discovered a way to concentrate electrical waves so that they create a directed pulse capable of altering the physical properties of matter. He called it a ray of simultaneous destruction and healing. No one understood what he meant, but his notebooks from the 1930s contained diagrams of devices where energy is focused into a single point and transformed into a radiant stream. In letters to his students, he wrote that if he found the right frequency, he could not only destroy metal, but also restore what has been destroyed. Officially, this project never existed. But after his death, the military broke into his room at the New Yorker Hotel and confiscated all his papers. Among them were folders labeled photon beam. Reports, partially declassified years later, stated that the discovered plans described a high-energy directed pulse transmission system. No one knew what this meant. Scientists debated whether such a device could be created, but Army engineers continued their work in secret. This led to speculation that this research formed the basis for what would later be called Project Bluebeam. According to one theory, it was a program to develop a technology capable of reproducing atmospheric light phenomena, so realistic that they could influence human perception. Some documents contain the phrase visual projection using radio frequency resonance. The idea was supposedly to use electromagnetic waves to create images visible in the sky. Later, conspiracy theorists would claim that Tesla had developed not a weapon, but a way to transmit images and sounds directly into the human mind. According to legend, he said that light is not just radiation, it's a message. He believed that the structure of the photon contained a code capable of carrying not only energy, but also information. By changing the frequency of light, one could trick the brain into seeing what wasn't there. These words would later be taken out of context, but in essence, Tesla truly believed that light could communicate with consciousness. He wrote that a photon is a thought made visible. Some researchers believe that the Bluebeam was not a military project, but a distorted version of his ideas about global energy transmission. In one of the discovered notes, he wrote, "When humanity learns to control the frequency of light, wars will disappear, for it will be possible to send not destruction, but truth." But after his death, these words took on a completely different meaning. Instead of truth, they were seen as an instrument of control. According to archival data, in the early 1940s, several engineers working for the government attempted to reproduce the diagrams in his papers. Their reports mentioned a high-density light discharge and a controlled spectrum effect. One of the engineers later reported that during desert tests, the air above the device turned a bright blue, and nearby instruments recorded a powerful electromagnetic emission. After this, the experiments were stopped and the results were classified. Many believe that it was from these developments that future programs for creating technologies for psychological influence through electromagnetic waves emerged. Tesla's drawings are said to have been used in the study of high-frequency oscillations that influence human perception. At that time, no one knew what it meant to influence consciousness with light. But if we recall Tesla's words, everything becomes alarmingly clear. He wrote, "When the frequency of light coincides with the frequency of the soul, man will see what is hidden." Some researchers are convinced that Tesla was indeed attempting to create a device capable of materializing images using energy. He said that light is a living substance, and space is merely its form. By forcing energy to move at the right pace, thoughts can be made visible. These ideas later evolved into the legend of the blue beam, which can project images directly onto the sky. There's a theory that several weeks before his death, Tesla summoned a representative of the Yugoslav embassy and handed him an envelope marked "For the Future." It allegedly contained blueprints for a device described as a ray of truth. The documents disappeared, their traces lost among other archives. A note was later found among his belongings reading, "The blue light is the memory of the future." These words became a symbol of what remains a mystery to this day. Today, the blue ray theory is considered a myth. However, there is considerable evidence that, in the final years of his life, Tesla did indeed create something that emitted a bright blue glow. Hotel neighbors recalled a strange light escaping from under his room door at night, like a shimmering, misty aura. When asked about the cause, he smiled and replied that he was talking to the light. Some physicists believe these may have been experiments with ultra-short waves, prefiguring the laser. Others believe he was attempting to prove the existence of an invisible spectrum of consciousness. But whether he was a madman, a genius, or a prophet, Tesla remained convinced to the end of his life that light could not only illuminate, but also remember. Many decades have passed since then, but a strange aura still lingers around his name. These days, when mysterious flashes frequently appear in the skies above cities and new technologies project images directly into the air, many recall his words. Perhaps he truly did leave humanity a key we haven't yet learned to use. And if the blue light ever flares in the sky again, perhaps it won't be a sign of danger, but a quiet reminder from a man who tried to force energy to speak the truth. After all, as he wrote before his death, light is thought freed from the body. Invisible weapon. When Nikola Tesla spoke of a light capable of not only illuminating, but also destroying, many dismissed his words. But even then, in the final years of his life, quiet conversations were swirling in government offices and laboratories on both sides of the Atlantic about a project that could change the very nature of war. Tesla called it telephoresis, the wireless transmission of concentrated energy. For others, it was simply a death ray. He claimed to have invented a device capable of sending a narrow stream of particles that could destroy metal, melt armor, and burn out aircraft engines hundreds of kilometers away. He said this beam left no smoke, made no sound, and was invisible to the human eye. Only a flash, like lightning, and the silence that followed. The first mentions of his experiments appeared in 1934. Back then, New York newspapers reported on a mysterious experiment that was supposed to put an end to all wars. In interviews, Tesla claimed his device could protect any country, as no plane or army could cross the line of his beam. He said energy belonged to no one, but could be harnessed to serve peace. And if humanity understood this principle, it would create not weapons, but an invisible wall that would render wars pointless. However, his words also carried a warning. He said that anyone who managed to harness this power without understanding would destroy not cities, but space itself. He hinted that energy directed at the wrong rhythm could tear the structure of matter. At the time, no one understood what he was talking about. Only decades later would scientists begin to talk about microwave radiation and plasma pulses, confirming that some of his ideas were not fantasy, but a premonition of the future of physics. One of his notes, discovered after his death, described a device that focused energy into a narrow channel using an electrostatic field. Tesla wrote that if this flow was directed at a certain speed, it became physical lightning. He claimed he could create a shock equal to a dynamite explosion, but without the fire and smoke. His contemporaries laughed, but he himself repeated, "Lightning is but an obedient servant if you know its name." Among his papers, a diagram was discovered depicting a central coil surrounded by 4 spherical reflectors. This device, he claimed, could compress the ether and release its energy in the form of a clot of light. He called it not a weapon, but a shield. "I do not create death," he wrote. "I create a boundary that evil cannot cross." But after the scientist's death, all his papers ended up in the hands of a defense agency. Years later, rumors would surface that the Invisible Beam project had indeed existed. In the early 1940s, a group of engineers, under military supervision, were exploring the possibility of transmitting energy over long distances. They used Tesla's surviving notes and conducted experiments in the Nevada desert. Locals reported flashes of light illuminating the horizon and strange interference in radio receivers. Some claimed to see streaks of light appearing in the sky, resembling lightning but accompanied by no sound or thunder. Among those who studied Tesla's papers was a young physicist who later became a participant in the nuclear project. He said that the archives contained documents describing a beam with an energy density exceeding anything known at that time. These notes soon disappeared. Some claimed they were destroyed, others that they are still stored in closed laboratories. Tesla claimed this beam was capable not only of destruction, but also of healing. He believed that energy was controlled not by a person's will, but by their state of being. If used with hatred, it destroys. If used with love, it restores. Energy senses the one who controls it, he wrote in one of his last letters. And perhaps this is why none of his subsequent projects were able to replicate his discoveries. After all, for him, physics was always an extension of the spirit. There's a theory that Tesla continued working on this device in secret during his final years. A humming noise was heard at night in the hotel where he was staying, and bright flashes would appear from under the door. When a cleaning lady knocked on the door one day, he quietly replied, "Don't come in, there's too much light here today." After his death, several metal cylinders, charred and melted from the inside, were found in his room. No one knew what they were. Legends of his invisible weapon gave rise to numerous rumors. Some claimed that his discoveries formed the basis of modern directed energy systems, while others said his beam was not material, but spiritual, a means of protection from destructive thoughts. But even the most skeptical scientists acknowledged that the calculations in his notebooks did not contradict physics. They were simply ahead of their time. He often said that man is unprepared to wield power he cannot understand. For him, the true weapon lay not in the machine, but in the mind. Destruction begins where awareness ends, he wrote, and perhaps that's why he never shared the full project with anyone. He feared not for himself, but for those who would try to harness energy without knowing what it felt like. Today, the death ray is remembered as a legend. But whenever strange light phenomena appear during tests of new technologies, when lightning streaks across the sky without a thunderstorm, and instruments detect bursts of unknown energy, Tesla's name resurfaces. Perhaps he truly did build something that defies explanation. Or perhaps his ray truly was not meant to destroy, but to protect, a light that never fades because it is born from thought itself. In one of his final entries, dated January 1943, he wrote, "I leave the world a light that cannot be seen with the eyes. It will appear when man learns to see with his heart." And these words became his last will, a warning and a hope at once. After all, as he said, energy does not choose whom to illuminate. It simply waits for someone to understand its language. The secret notebooks of the New Yorker Hotel. The winter of 1943 was cold and silent. The world was burning in the flames of war. And in the heart of New York, in an old hotel on 8th Avenue, lived a man once called the Lord of Lightning. Nikola Tesla was old, ill, and almost forgotten. He no longer appeared in newspapers, gave interviews, or received guests. His life had shrunk to the size of a small room on the 33rd floor, where he ate simple bread and milk, fed pigeons on the windowsill, and listened to the silence at night. But it was there, in this silence, that he completed his most enigmatic work, one that he may never have finished. In the first days of January, he rarely left his room. His neighbors on the same floor recalled that at night, a faint bluish light would filter through a crack under the door, and sometimes a low hum, like the breathing of a huge machine, could be heard. No one knew what he was doing, but in his final notes, later discovered, he wrote, "My time hasn't ended, it's simply opened up." He seemed to sense he was approaching a limit, not of life, but of knowledge. When the maid opened the door on the morning of January 8th, the room was empty and motionless. An old man's body lay on the bed, calm and quiet, as if asleep. 3 objects stood on the table: a glass of milk, a lit candle, and a thick black-bound notebook. Its pages were covered in tiny handwriting, as if written in haste. Shortly after Tesla's death was confirmed, a group of men in dark coats arrived at the hotel. No one identified themselves. They ordered no one to enter the room and locked the doors from the inside. It was later revealed that these were agents of the Foreign Property Office, an organization operating under government control. They took all the papers, notebooks, blueprints, even personal letters. It was said that over 80 boxes of documents were found in the room, but within a few days, some of them had disappeared. When Tesla's relatives demanded the return of the property, they were given only a few folders containing nothing but old newspapers and notes about pigeons. Everything else vanished without a trace. Since then, the legend of the secret notebooks has been swirling. They were said to contain notes on transmitting energy over distances, blueprints for a death ray, and descriptions of machines that operate without fuel. But there were other rumors too, about pages where Tesla wrote about time, about connections with other worlds, and about technologies that could hear the thoughts of the universe. One agent, later dismissed from the service, claimed to have seen a diagram of a device called a bridge between fields. According to him, it resembled not a scientific project, but something like a symbol, a spiral divided into 12 parts, each corresponding to a specific frequency of the human brain. When the documents fell into the hands of government experts, Professor John Trump, an engineer and physicist known for his work on high-voltage installations, took them under his wing. He studied the papers for several weeks and later declared that there was nothing in them that could pose a threat. But many were skeptical. Those who knew Tesla understood that he never wrote down the obvious. His ideas were always hidden between the lines. There's a theory that some of the papers were indeed classified and transferred to Army research centers. Some of his formulas formed the basis for projects to create plasma weapons and wireless energy transmission systems. But there were other notes that couldn't be classified. Among them was the term vibration of consciousness, and a drawing depicting a man surrounded by a halo of light. Beneath the drawing was the phrase, "This is not an image, it is a state." Over the years, the mystery only grew. Some claimed Tesla's papers were taken to Los Alamos and hidden among the nuclear project's archives. Others said they fell into private hands and were being used to create technologies that humanity has yet to learn about. Rumors occasionally surface of mysterious purchases of old boxes labeled Tesla papers at auctions, but not a single document has been officially confirmed. At the New Yorker hotel, the room where Tesla died remained locked for a long time. Staff reported hearing the walls crackle at night, as if an electric current were running through them, and the lights sometimes turning on by themselves. One day, a technician repairing the wiring reported that the instruments there were showing electromagnetic fluctuations, even though the power was off. It all seemed a coincidence until they recalled one of Tesla's last notes. The energy doesn't die with the body, it's just waiting to be called. Some researchers believe that in his final notebooks, he was describing principles, not machines. He said that energy and information are one and the same, and that consciousness can directly control a field. Perhaps he was trying to find a way to preserve thought beyond death, not as a spirit, but as a wave inscribed in space. If this is true, then his final works were not about physics, but about immortality. Many years have passed since then, but the legend of the missing notebooks hasn't disappeared. Every time new technologies reminiscent of Tesla's ideas emerge, someone asks, were they taken from his archive? Some are convinced that these papers contain a formula that explains not only electricity, but life itself, as a field capable of thinking. And perhaps, somewhere in dusty storage rooms, behind unmarked doors, those very notebooks still lie, covered in tiny handwriting, where lines become equations, and equations become prayers. In them, Tesla may have left not inventions, but instructions for understanding a world where energy and mind merge into one. And if humanity ever rediscovers them, it might understand. He didn't die in that room. He simply changed form, becoming part of the field he spent his entire life trying to hear, the mystery of the 0 point. When Nikola Tesla said energy was everywhere, he was rarely understood. Some considered him a prophet, others a madman, but he himself was certain. Space isn't empty. It's full of power, hidden in every inch of air, in every particle of light, in every breath. He called this ether, and later, 0 point energy. He claimed the entire universe vibrates, and if you find the node of this vibration, you can tap into inexhaustible power. People laughed because physics didn't yet know such words, but Tesla was already living in the future. He wrote that the energy of space is an ocean in which we swim without even noticing the water. All we need is to learn to draw it without machines or wires, directly from the very structure of the world. Energy doesn't come from outside, he said. It's already here, just waiting to be noticed. He believed that if you tune a generator to the vibration of matter itself, you can make emptiness work, not from fuel or mechanics, but from the very life of space. In one of his notebooks, he described a device that would later be called a vacuum resonator. It was a cylinder with copper plates arranged at an angle and a rotating core. When turned on, it began to emit a barely audible hum, as if breathing. Tesla claimed that this device was capable of generating energy without consuming it. His contemporaries called it a miracle, but he calmly replied, "There are no miracles, only ununderstood laws." For many years, he maintained that the ether is not just a medium, but a living field. He called it the source of light and sound, time and gravity. In letters to colleagues, he wrote that everything that exists is a trace of the ether's vibrations, and matter is merely a condensation of waves. By altering the frequency of these waves, one can not only create movement, but also destroy mass itself. Physicists would later call this the zero-point oscillation, the very essence that underlies everything. He claimed to have discovered a way to induce localized disturbances in this field. With the correct oscillation rhythm, the energy would begin to power the device itself. He wrote that he saw the device's needle move without a power source, as if something invisible were pushing it. For him, this was proof that the ether was responding. When Tesla first showed the prototype to his colleagues, they refused to believe it. One engineer said it was impossible, that perpetual motion machines didn't exist. Tesla only smiled. "Not perpetual," he said, "just properly wired." He didn't explain what he meant. Later, he became more cautious. He wrote that the power of the ether was like the ocean. If you throw a stone at it, it will respond with a wave, but if you hit it too hard, the wave will sweep everything away. In one of his notes, he warned, "The void does not tolerate violence. Energy must flow gently, otherwise it will contract and return." No one knew what this contract and return meant. Perhaps he sensed a danger he couldn't articulate. One day, in the early 1930s, he conducted an experiment in his Manhattan laboratory. According to witnesses, he connected the device to a small transformer, and within seconds, the entire room was illuminated with a soft golden light. The lamps glowed even though the power was off. Metal objects began to tremble, and the air became thick, as before a thunderstorm. Tesla stood in the center, repeating, "This is the breath of space." After a minute, he turned off the device. After this experiment, he never turned it on again. He later wrote that he realized that etheric energy doesn't belong to humans. They can only touch it, but not hold it. His diaries contain the phrase, "We don't discover energy. It discovers us." He believed that the ether reacts to the experimenter's state of consciousness. If a person isn't ready, the energy withdraws, as if sensing fear. And if this is true, then his discoveries were not so much physical as spiritual. Some modern scientists suggest that Tesla anticipated the concept of the quantum vacuum, the idea that even empty space contains energy. But back then, in the early 20th century, these words sounded like heresy. He became an outcast in scientific circles, though he quietly continued his work. In one letter, he wrote, "I see the void moving. It's not dead, it's alive." When researchers combed through the archives after his death, they found several pages covered in symbols. In the center was a spiral, surrounded by the words, "0 point is not a place, it is a state." Tesla's signature was at the bottom, but the handwriting was shaky. Perhaps he was already ill. Perhaps he wrote at night, when he again heard those voices calling to him from the silence. Some believe Tesla was the first person to understand that spatial energy is not a resource, but a language spoken by the universe. He wasn't looking for a way to make money. He was looking for a way to understand. And perhaps his discoveries haven't disappeared. Strange phenomena still occur in laboratories around the world. Devices display energy no one can explain. Generators produce power that doesn't match the input. And whenever scientists encounter the inexplicable, Tesla's name comes up again. He said that humanity would one day learn to extract energy from the void itself, but warned, this knowledge will come when people stop thinking that energy exists for power. The mystery of the 0 point remains unsolved. Perhaps Tesla truly touched that which connects life and light, matter and spirit. Or perhaps he was simply too sensitive to miss the whispers of the universe. But if his words are true, then the space around us is not empty. It is filled with breath, waiting for someone to dare once again to turn on his device and hear what Tesla simply called silence filled with energy. the light that never goes out. When Nikola Tesla claimed that light could burn without a source, no one believed him. Even those who admired his intellect considered it a beautiful metaphor, not reality. However, those who visited his laboratory on the outskirts of New York City recalled a strange sight: lamps glowing with a soft white glow, even though their wires were not connected to a power outlet or generator. The air around them trembled as if saturated with electricity, and the entire room resembled a living organism filled with a pulse of light. This was not the familiar light of incandescent bulbs. It was pure, almost cold, and created the feeling that it emanated not from glass, but from the very fabric of air. Tesla claimed that every point in space was capable of luminescence if its energy were awakened. He argued that light shouldn't be produced, it should be released. He believed that air stored an electrical force similar to breath, and if its state was altered, it began to radiate. He wrote, "The world is full of light. People have simply learned to see only its reflection." At the end of the 19th century, during a public demonstration at his Houston Street laboratory, Tesla showed the audience dozens of lamps placed around the room igniting. He stood in the center of the room, raised his hand, and instantly the space lit up, as if coming to life. The crowd applauded, but no one understood what he had done. He explained that he was using high-frequency oscillations that excited the ether, causing it to release energy. From then on, talk began of his invisible current, an energy that flows through everything. Later, after the collapse of the Wardenclyffe project, Tesla claimed to have created an improved wireless lighting system. He claimed his lamps could operate anywhere on the planet if a resonant source was turned on. In his notes, he wrote that every particle of air could become a tiny lamp if forced to vibrate at the right rhythm. He believed that light was simply a state of matter, not a combustion process, and if matter could change, then perpetual light could be created. Legend has it that in the early 1930s, Tesla demonstrated to several witnesses a device resembling a glass sphere filled with a soft blue glow. The sphere could be held in the hand and didn't warm the skin, but the light within never flickered. It seemed to be alive and breathing. He described it as not a lamp, but a concentration of energy. After his death, none of these devices were ever found, but letters from some contemporaries mention Tesla balls glowing wirelessly. Many dismissed this as an illusion, but some physicists later suggested he could create plasma structures, stable, luminous formations in the air. However, no human has been able to replicate this effect. Perhaps it wasn't just the technology, but also his ability to control the field's vibrations. Tesla always maintained that light was more than just a physical phenomenon. For him, it was a symbol of understanding, proof that man could become part of energy rather than its consumer. He said that when light burned without fuel, man had come closer to the truth. He wrote, "When the source becomes internal, the world will cease to be dark." After his death, rumors circulated that some of the lamps in his laboratory continued to glow for several days. Technicians removing the equipment reported seeing a faint glow in glass bulbs scattered across the floor. It seemed as if the air around them had memorized the energy and refused to let it go. These stories were never officially confirmed, but they became part of the myth of Tesla's eternal light. Some researchers believe he found a way to harness zero-point energy, the very same energy he spoke of in his final lectures. They are certain his lamps were powered by the natural vibrations of space, drawing energy from the ether itself. Others argue this is impossible, that the energy must have a source. But even skeptics admit, there was something in Tesla's experiments that physics cannot explain. Sometimes it seemed as if his light was not of this world. Those who saw it in person said it resembled the glow of stars, soft, endless, shadowless. In one of his letters to a student, he wrote, "When I stand in the darkness and turn on the light, I feel not joy, but a presence, as if someone is returning." For him, light was not only energy, but also memory. He said that every flash contains a trace of everything that has ever existed. Today, so many years later, no one knows what happened to those lamps. Perhaps they were broken, perhaps they simply went out. But the legend remains. Museums hold his coils, drawings, and instruments, but no one has ever been able to restore the light they emitted. Scientists tried to reproduce his experiments, creating generators, coils, and transmitters, but that pure, soundless light never returned. Sometimes it seems as if this light hasn't completely left this world. They say that in the old laboratories where it worked, brief flashes can still be seen at night, as if the air remembers the man who once made it speak. Tesla dreamed that one day cities would be illuminated without wires, smoke, or noise, and that people would live in harmony with energy, not against it. He said that light is the breath of the universe, and if you understand its rhythm, you can live forever. Perhaps this light truly never goes out. We've simply stopped seeing it because we've forgotten how to look, and somewhere, in the invisible field he called ether, the same radiance once ignited by a man who dreamed of freeing energy from wires, and humanity from darkness still burns. The Philadelphia Trail. By the mid-1940s, Nikola Tesla's name had become a shadow of its former self. He died alone, but his ideas lived on, and, as happens with those too far ahead of their time, they began to grow beyond science, transforming into myths, legends, and fears. Of all the stories associated with his name, none is stranger or more controversial than the one that began in Philadelphia's naval harbor. A story that blends light, magnetic fields, human fear, and perhaps Tesla's legacy. In the fall of 1943, just a few months after his death, the destroyer USS Eldridge was moored in the harbor. Official records stated that the ship was testing new radar camouflage technologies, but witnesses claimed something different happened that day. They described a flash of bright green light, a strange fog rising from the water, and the ship vanishing before the eyes of sailors on other vessels. A few seconds later, the fog cleared and the ship reappeared, but not where it had been. Witnesses claimed the ship's metal surfaces were shaking as if molten, and chaos reigned on the deck. People were screaming, some were unconscious, and some of the crew had disappeared. Those who were found were no less astonished. The sailors were in shock, their skin was burned, and some seemed to have their bodies fused with the ship's metal parts. These details were hushed up for a long time, but rumors spread across the country. Thus began the legend of the Philadelphia experiment. The connection to Tesla emerged later. In the late 1950s, an eyewitness claimed to have heard the project was based on drawings found in archives after the scientist's death. These documents allegedly described a system of magnetic fields capable of bending space. At first, no one paid attention to these claims, but later, declassified reports did indeed contain references to high-frequency generators of unknown origin. Some engineers speculated that these could have been Tesla coils, advanced transmitters that generate a powerful electromagnetic field. According to this theory, the military experiment wasn't about cloaking, but rather an attempt to make the ship invisible to space. The scientists envisioned an electromagnetic field that would envelop the vessel in a wave of energy that would alter the density of matter. They didn't think this was possible until the ship actually disappeared. What happened next, no one knows. Some believe the military accidentally replicated principles Tesla had been working on since his Wardenclyffe days. He claimed that energy could change not only motion, but the very structure of space. One of his notebooks contains the phrase, "If you combine the electric and gravitational fields in unison, space will obey." This may have been mere philosophy, but engineers inspired by his ideas may have attempted to implement them literally. Rumors later circulated that the Eldridge hadn't simply vanished from the harbor, but had reappeared elsewhere, hundreds of kilometers away, in Norfolk. Some claim to have seen it there that same day for a few minutes, before vanishing again. If true, this would suggest a relocation, not a camouflage. The project was soon shut down, and the documents were destroyed. Scientists studying these legends noticed a strange pattern. Many of the terms used in the secret reports matched expressions from Tesla's work: field vibration, vortex displacement, etheric resonance. These words were repeated dozens of times. Of course, there was no evidence, but the idea that his experiments with space could have led to disaster seemed too tempting to ignore. Some eyewitnesses said that after the incident, the military attempted to replicate the effect, but to no avail. Every time the device was turned on, malfunctions occurred, people complained of headaches, instruments malfunctioned, and the space seemed to sparkle. One engineer later wrote, "This energy is not intended to be controlled. It behaves like a living being." These words sounded almost like a quote from Tesla. In the 1950s, a former sailor named Carl Allen sent a letter to a renowned astronomer claiming to have participated in the experiment. He wrote that the technology was based on Tesla's devices for manipulating time and space. The letter claimed that the ship appeared in another dimension for a few seconds, and some of the crew saw myriads of luminous threads stretching into infinity. These words would later become the focus of dozens of books, films, and investigations. Of course, mainstream science dismissed all of this as myth, but oddities remained. Magnetic anomalies in the Philadelphia harbor area, equipment failures, eyewitness accounts, all fueled the legend. Some said Tesla's death was the trigger, as if, at the moment of his passing, some of the energy he had stored up was released back into the world. There are also darker theories. According to one, the experiment was no accident, but an attempt to implement Tesla's final project, which he called the Time Resonance Network. Notes found after his death mention a device capable of bending light around an object. If this principle were applied to the scale of a spaceship, the results could have been catastrophic. Historians still debate whether the Philadelphia experiment was real. Perhaps it was merely a series of coincidences, conjectures, and fears. But the very idea that space could be curved to swallow a ship arose precisely from the work of a man who spent his life trying to harness the ether. And if legend is to be believed, after that day, one of the surviving sailors uttered a phrase that became emblematic of this entire mystery. "We were where time has no place." These words could have belonged to anyone, but they sounded as if they had been spoken by Tesla himself, the man who spent his entire life trying to build a bridge between energy and eternity. Perhaps he truly had found a way to circumnavigate space, or perhaps someone after him simply repeated the step he was afraid to take. But if the energy of memory lingers, then the fog that rose over Philadelphia that day was more than just the remnant of an experiment. It was the whisper of the ether, answering the call of a man who had once learned to listen to silence. The last experiment. The winter of 1943 found New York City in an uneasy silence. War was raging across the globe, but in the heart of Manhattan, outside the windows of an old hotel, something was happening that would later be called an unrecorded event. On the night Nikola Tesla passed away, the sky above the city was lit by a flash so powerful and brief that witnesses thought a transformer had exploded somewhere nearby. However, not a single power hub was damaged, not a single line was broken. Only for a few seconds did the entire city descend into a hum, a low rumble, like the breath of the earth. No one knew exactly what had happened, but an old electrical engineer who inspected the equipment that morning said, "It felt as if the current had traveled not through the cables, but through the air." Legend has it that Tesla conducted his final experiment that night. He knew his days were numbered, they say, and wanted to test a theory he'd been hesitant to test in life. He claimed that a person could connect consciousness with energy if they found the right resonance. His idea was both simple and insane. Every organism is a coil, every thought a wave, and if the wave aligns with the rhythm of the universe, a person will dissolve into the field, becoming part of the light. In his final weeks, he barely ate or slept, only writing, drawing, and sitting by the window, gazing out over the city. In one of the last letters found on his desk, he wrote, "I am going not into death, but into frequency." The maid who brought him milk said that the day before his death, he asked no one to enter his room. He was calm, polite, and spoke quietly and evenly. But there was something in his gaze that hadn't been there before, a strange focus, as if he were listening to something inaudible to others. That evening, a low hum, like the sound of an organ, came from the room. She later admitted to seeing the light in the hallway flicker, and the air begin to smell of ozone, as after a thunderstorm. A few minutes later, everything was quiet. The next morning, the door was locked from the inside. Some researchers believe Tesla actually attempted to activate the device he'd been building for the past few months. His assistant said he was working on a new device that utilized the resonance of the human brain. He claimed that if a person could detect radio waves, they could become part of a field that transmitted energy. Perhaps that's exactly what he attempted that night, to connect the body and the ether. There are reports that power plant instruments in the New Yorker hotel area recorded a brief voltage surge that night. It lasted less than a second, but was so powerful that the needles went off the scale. However, not a single circuit breaker tripped. Technicians couldn't find an explanation. One of them later said, "It was as if the energy was coming from somewhere else, not here." When the agents entered the room after his death, a candle burned on the table, and a notebook labeled Experiment Number 9 lay nearby. Inside were only a few pages. The first contained a formula similar to a radio transmitter schematic, but instead of coils and resistors, there were the words, "The body is the conductor, the heart is the source, "The mind is the key." Then followed a short description. When activated, the field creates a resonance with consciousness. The threshold is instantaneous. The transition is irreversible. The last line scrawled read, "I see the light from within." Official reports mention nothing unusual. They simply say Tesla died of a heart attack. But people working at the hotel told a different story. They said that a few seconds before midnight, a bright blue light emanated from under the room's door, and the entire corridor was filled with the smell of heated metal. When the light faded, everything became quiet, as after an explosion, but there was no destruction. Thin burn marks, spiraling upward, remained on the ceiling. Years later, a strange entry appeared in the archives. One of the agents involved in the seizure of his papers wrote in his personal diary, "When I entered the room, the air trembled, not from fear, but from electricity. It seemed as if he was still there." This man disappeared shortly after the publication of his memoirs. Some researchers believe Tesla was attempting to realize his idea of transmitting consciousness through energy. He believed that the mind is not limited by the body, and that if a sufficiently powerful field is created, consciousness can be unbound from matter. He wrote, "Consciousness is electricity that has become self-consciousness. If returned to its source, it will not die." For him, death was not the end, but merely a change of form. After that night, rumors circulated that flashes of blue light were seen in the skies over New York for several days. People said they appeared suddenly and vanished without a trace. Radio receivers picked up interference, short, rhythmic signals resembling a sequence of numbers. Some claimed they matched the frequency Tesla used in his old experiments. Journalists later wrote that his body radiated no heat, as if all the warmth had been lost along with the energy. Doctors attributed this to a natural process, but those who saw him that night claimed he emitted a faint glow. His belongings were taken away, and the room was sealed. But a few weeks later, the staff again complained of strange phenomena. Lights would turn on at night, even though the power was off, and metal objects on the table would jingle, as if from a slight vibration. Electricians checked the wiring, but found nothing. Then the administrator uttered a phrase that became hotel legend. "I think it's still working." Today, no one can prove that Tesla actually conducted his final experiment. Perhaps it's just a beautiful story, born of a mixture of fear and admiration. But if you recall his words from many years ago, everything takes on a different meaning. He said, "I'm not afraid of death because energy doesn't die. It simply changes direction." And if this is true, then perhaps that flash over New York was not the end, but the beginning. Perhaps in that moment, a man who had listened to the silence of the universe his entire life finally heard an answer. And if energy truly does hold memory, then somewhere deep within the field, in the infinite vibration of light, its frequency still resonates, the one that bears the name Nikola Tesla, where Nikola Tesla's light sleeps. Decades have passed since that winter night when Nikola Tesla's body was found in his hotel room, his papers vanishing into the archives without a trace. But his name, like energy, has not dissolved into time. It continues to resonate in laboratories where scientists searched for new sources of power, in the voices of those who believed he had passed away, not by dying, but by becoming what he dedicated his life to. People came to his burial site, bringing candles and copper coils, as if hoping he could still hear. And perhaps they weren't so far off the mark. Tesla's ashes rest not in the ground, but in a golden sphere that stands in Belgrade, in a museum bearing his name. This sphere is a symbol, as if an extension of his idea of the perfect form of energy. The sphere reflects light from all sides, without corners, and seems to breathe the breath of space itself. People who have stood nearby often report feeling a slight tingling in their fingers, as if an electric current were coursing through the air. Some call it a suggestion, others a strange truth. Many researchers who have studied his legacy say that Tesla didn't simply discover electricity. He sensed the connection between energy and consciousness. His formulas, his phrases, his strange words about a field that thinks seem today not fantasy, but a guess about the future. He wrote that everything in the universe is connected by invisible threads, not metaphors, but waves, that every person is a flash of light in a vast field, and death is merely a change in wavelength. Reading his letters from his final years, you feel as if he no longer spoke for the person. His thoughts became calmer, more stern, but deeper, as if he were observing from afar. He wrote, "When I close my eyes, do not look for me in the earth. Look for me in the air, in the lightning, in the fire that dances over the sea. I will be where the current flows and where the light goes out. These lines seem poetic, but perhaps they were an instruction, a final attempt to explain that energy and soul are one. After his death, strange phenomena were repeatedly observed above the place where his belongings were stored. In the museum's silence, a low hum, like that of a coil, was sometimes heard, even though the equipment was turned off. Employees reported that the lamps would occasionally flicker for a second, as if an invisible being were touching the air. Scientists attribute this to electrostatics, but believers in miracles say it's him returning, checking to make sure everything is still flowing properly. His ideas have survived eras, generations, and scientific paradigms. He predicted that one day humanity would stop extracting energy from fuel and learn to draw it from space itself. Today, when physicists talk about the quantum vacuum, zero-point fluctuations, and the hidden energy of the universe, his voice echoes in these words. He predicted this back when the world believed that nothing was empty. But Tesla's secret lies beyond his discoveries. There's something more to it than just science. He lived as if he heard music inaccessible to others. His life wasn't a chain of formulas, but a rhythm. Each discovery was less the result of calculation than of intuition, as if he remembered what others were yet to discover. When he spoke of the light that never goes out, he wasn't talking about lamps or coils. He was talking about the light of knowledge that once illuminates the mind can never be extinguished. Legend has it that the day before his death, he wrote a short letter addressed to those who come after. It has not been found, but witnesses' accounts include the words, "I left the door open." What this meant, no one knows. Perhaps he was speaking of the future, perhaps of a transition, or perhaps of that very door between the worlds of matter and energy that he had been trying to open his entire life. Philosophers say that a genius is a person in whom the universe is aware of itself, and perhaps Tesla was just that. He didn't simply study electricity, he spoke to it. He didn't harness energy, but listened to it. His laboratories were temples, and his formulas were prayers. He lived between lightning and silence, and perhaps in this space, he found what he was looking for: proof that all things are one. Sometimes it seems as if his light truly hasn't faded. After all, every time lightning flashes in the sky, we see the same energy that once passed through his hands. Every time electricity powers our world, an echo of his work resonates within. He has become part of this force, dissolving into its infinity. Perhaps that's why his death feels less like an end and more like a return. He said that the human soul is like a spark. It doesn't disappear, but rather disappears into the ether, where stars are born. And if you look at the night sky, you can imagine that somewhere out there, among the billions of lights, there's a single spark whose rhythm matches the beat of the entire universe. A spark that remembers the sound of silence between thunderstorms. This spark is Nikola Tesla, the man who arrived during the lightning and, perhaps, departed with it. His light never sleeps. He simply became part of that field he once called the breath of God. He was born during a thunderstorm and departed in a light that never faded. The world called him mad, but perhaps he simply heard what others could not. The whisper of the universe, speaking the language of energy. Nikola Tesla did not disappear. He became a current in wires, a flash of lightning, the flicker of a lamp in the night. Everything that moves, glows, or lives carries a fragment of his presence. His light did not fade into the past. It dissolved into eternity,